Hello and welcome to the Sideline Live podcast. My name is Orla Keeling and I am the host of the podcast, where every week we bring you a brand new episode with guests ranging from Olympic champions to local heroes, coaches, support staff, and anybody involved in the world of sport. Each week we will dive into different topics, including current affairs in sport, identity, skill, mindset, coaching, and also shine a light on those flying under the radar. So tune in for brand new episodes, new stories, and new insights you've never heard before. Okay, delighted to welcome back Mr. Damian Hughes. We had a great conversation before. I'm always, after I record, will they come back on? But I've managed to convince you to do round two.
Although it's an absolute honour to be invited back on. We were just reflecting, weren't we, that it's 4 years ago since we were chatting last, and I still think of that conversation really warmly. And I think you're such a brilliant interviewer as well. I was saying to you that your warmth and curiosity and kindness meant that it was a no-brainer. So thank you for having me.
Oh, no, thank you for the kind words. I was thinking, if you remember the interview, I probably said something stupid on it. So glad I didn't that time.
No, you didn't. No, not at all.
Damien, I would love to know, you've done over 400 interviews with guests, but on the flip side, as a guest, you've done a lot of interviews, actually. You've been very generous. What have you not been asked yet as a guest?
Oh, that's a good one. I think, oh, you've stumped me on with that one, all. That's a great question. I think what what you normally get asked is the questions around who's your favorite guest, what have you enjoyed. I think I'd probably like the questions about what have you learned from it. I often that's the bit that I feel. I've seen this when I've worked with sports teams, like where you bring in like a guest speaker from outside the world of sport, and they're often really entertaining and engaging. But the bit of what have you learned from that, what you're going to do differently on that, is the bit that I don't always see the conversation taking place. So I think for me, it's often the question I've not been asked is, well, what have you learned from it? Because it's all very well interviewing and meeting these amazing people, but are you doing anything with it to role model it? So I'm going to assume you've asked me that question, and I will give you.
Well, I did have it written down, but we'll go to it right now. What have you learned from 400 plus episodes?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing I'd say is that you've got you'd have to be a rock rather than a sponge, to use Clive Woodward's language, if you're not sat opposite 400 amazing people and you're not thinking, this is what I'm going to take from it. So there's, I could give you some really small things. Like I met a guy called Dr. Peter Attia, who gave me a tip about when you're with your family, be with your family. So I was like, how do you do that though? And he's like, buy a second phone, buy a second phone. So like when you go on holiday, have a phone with the number that they can reach you on. You can use for QR codes in restaurants. You can take pictures, but you don't have any other means of which you can be distracted. So that's like a really simple tactic that as soon as he said it, it was like, that is so obvious. So I bought a second phone. So when I'm with my family, I'm on my second phone. That means that so they get the time. Right the way through to, we met a guy called Ben Bergeron, who's he's a multiple CrossFit champion coach. And I remember him just set your alarm clock 15 minutes earlier. Just get out of bed 15 minutes earlier. So rather than say, I'm going to get up and do like a big, massive, hard workout, just get up 15 minutes early and do a 15-minute workout. Because the chances are, once you get in the gym, you might stay for a bit longer than 50 minutes. But even if you don't, you've still started your day off by doing some activity and some exercise. So I picked up like some really small tactics and some like really useful tools like that, right the way through to people like a guy called Greg Hoffman, who was the chief marketer of Nike, who had this lovely line where he said, failure is the price of ambition. So if you're going to be ambitious, you're going to fail. you have to. It's almost baked into it. So incorporate it into your planning and work out how you do it. Now, for me, I've often been pretty unkind to myself when I've made a mistake or I've failed. And yet it was his words that really resonated about actually just start being kind to yourself because it's the price of going after ambitious or goal driven targets that you have. So there's been loads of things like that, Ola, that I've taken away from being lucky enough to sit down and do 400 interviews.
That reminds me of an insight I got from someone this year. It wasn't actually on the podcast, but I probably mentioned it. The advice was act your way into the feeling. And sometimes you have
Oh, I
to
love that. Go on, explain it.
well, it was actually in terms of, I was actually speaking to someone around sports injuries. Anyone that listens to this podcast, if they had a drinking game, that's one of the shots they take, or to mention their injuries.
Yeah.
But around, we were talking about how your brain is trying to protect you against injury. So it's, the forget the part of the brain. I really should have researched what I was going to say before I said that. But
Oh, go on.
but
Go
it
on.
was the whole piece around the brain is trying to protect you from injuring yourself again. So it's trying to put you off
Okay.
the previous experience. So it was a little bit of, you have to act your way into the feeling, where then when you get in kind of 10 or 15 minutes in, then you start to really enjoy it and kind of let loose and get free. And I use that now in other facets, and I find I go training now. I went from dreading going training and nearly looking for excuses, if, in case
Yeah.
my coach is listening, that I wasn't. But now I'm like the opposite, where I'm buzzing to go training. I'm down early. I'm at the line, buzzing to go, ready to go. And it's
Brilliant.
used in different aspects. Have I used it in, maybe if I was to do college assignments again? Probably not, because I hate them. But it's the different pieces that you pick up from different people, isn't it?
Well, all stuff like that. I mean, I love that. Like, act your way into the feeling. So, yeah, what comes first? Well, it's the feeling and the thought. But if you circumnavigate that, yeah, that's really powerful. I've heard it said in another way of um, like James Clear, the guy who wrote Atomic Habits, had this great line that he used with us. He went, "Heaviest weight in the gym is always the front door." And I was like, oh, I love that. But his point was, he was like, don't raise the bar, lower the bar. Like, like, don't set yourself high aspirations. Set yourself the lowest aspiration you can. So you feel like you've got over it, and then you feel like you've made progress, and then that has a virtuous circle effect on it. So yeah, like I'm not. So do you mind if I take that? I'll credit you with it, but at your way
Yeah,
into the
yeah. Well, I'll
feeling.
hear it now in the podcast, and I'll say that was for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um,
Yeah. There's a philosopher I know called Ola Keelan that told me this. Yeah. I'll I'll frame it like that if you're all right.
I love it, love it. That'll do, that'll do. Um, Damon, I couldn't believe it actually. One of my favorite questions, I don't think I actually asked you the
Go
last
on.
time, was what separates the best from the rest?
That is a good question. I think, and I'll I I'll resist giving sort of like a shallow answer to this because I think it's complex. So I think there's a whole heap of different factors that do it. I think there's something around consistency. And what I mean by that is like consistency of habits and behaviors. So it almost like frees you up to think with like greater bandwidth because you know that you're taking care of the habits and the habits are doing like the what Ian McGeehan told us were like world class basics. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I think consistency is a big thing. I think the ability to dance along the motivation spectrum, all the way from intrinsic right the way through to extrinsic, and not feel that it's one or the other. There's lots of pit stops along the way, is another aspect that we've seen. Like when I interviewed Alistair Brownlee, he was talking about how um, he said like he sets himself little targets, like little rewards. I'll get out of bed and get myself a cup of tea because he went, I will never wake up in the morning excited about jumping into a cold swimming pool. The process of doing that will never ever change and it'll never excite me. So setting myself little targets to get there is like a really simple and obvious way of dancing along that spectrum. I think there's some things that are around surrounding yourself with really good people people, like that old cliche that you're the sum of the five people you spend your time with. I think that is true when it comes to elite performers, just being surrounded by people that are your cheerleaders, the people that have got you back, people that'll tell you the truth. I think that's a big aspect of it. And then I think just that love, like that rage to master, I've heard it described as that willingness just to love your craft. So you're not in love with the outcome, you're in love with the process, and the outcome is almost a happy coincidence. So they're just four aspects that I've seen. We could talk about a lot more, but I don't think it's as simple as one or two answers. And I often say to people when I tell them about the interviews from the podcast that the diversity of our guests mean that be skeptical of anyone that comes along and gives you formulas or gives you binary good, bad, right, wrong responses, because having interviewed so many great performers from so many different guises, there isn't one way to do this. There's lots of different ways.
That's one thing that's kind of come up a couple of times is around what separates the rest from the best. And I remember I asked someone what is, and they said, yeah, because they're elite. They are the 1% of the 1%. No one or the 2% of the 2% for soccer academies. Do you think, are we gone to the point now where we're,
Yeah.
not to say anyone can be an elite athlete because genetically you have to do it, but have we kind of gotten into a sense of maybe that high performance piece that everyone's trying to chase and it's maybe not accessible for everyone?
Again, it's a great question, and if you permit me, I'd probably defer to an interview we did with Maro Itoje, so the England and the British and Irish Lions rugby captain, because he was the first guy that pulled us up. So when we asked the question, "What's high performance?" he went, "Well, can we just draw a distinction between world-class performance and high performance?" He said, "Because world-class performance is an objective set of measures. So if you're going to be a world-class sprinter, you're going to be needing to run around 10 seconds flat for 100 meters. And that's an objective measure. But if you've never run before and you're just learning to sprint, maybe 15 seconds is high performance for you. So you're not world class, but you're a high performer because you've improved your time. So high performance is always going to be subjective. World class is always going to be objective. And I think that that's a really important distinction to make, because I think anyone can be a high performer, because if you remember on that last conversation we had, we gave that definition of high performance is doing the best you can with the resources you've got in the moment you're in. So if you can answer yes to those three questions, yes, I'm doing the best I can in the moment I'm in with the resources I've got. Well, that's subjective and that's down to you. So I think yes, anyone can be a high performer. No, I don't think everyone can be a world-class performer or an elite performer, because that, by definition, is objective and it requires external validation to be able to measure it.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. One of the things that came up in the episode, I think it was Sean Dyche, I think it came up in your book as well, and it's probably one thing I disagree with it a little bit when we say how you do one thing is how you do everything. I find
Oh yeah,
when I'm passionate about something, Jesus, I'll do it. But when I'm not passionate, I'll look for anything else bar that thing.
yeah,
So I find it hard sometimes when they say how you do one thing is how you do everything. And I get the concept and it's all about how you show up and stuff like that. But sometimes I find passion is sometimes the key to unlocking to do something.
yeah. No, I agree. So I think again, what you're touching on there, Ola, is like the subtlety and the nuance of this, that we love these sound bites, don't we? So it's the England Rugby League coach Sean Wayne who used that phrase, how you do anything is how you do everything. And it resonated with me because his point was like, what he's also saying is in within context. So what he's saying is, if you're a member of my squad or my staff, and you show up late consistently for meetings, his point was that would indicate to me that you probably got some selfish tendencies, that you're not caring about other people that are sat waiting and giving up their time. So I think how you do anything is how you do everything within the context of what you're operating in. And you'd hope that if you were passionate about working within his world, turning up late for meetings isn't a persistent behavior. Like so you're right. I think it's important that let's avoid making these sort of sweeping generalizations. Do you know what I mean? Like he's lazy, she's driven, things like that. I think do everybody a disservice because it's always contextual. I mean, in I've just been doing some research for a book, and like a really good example of this is when we talk about delayed gratification. So you ever used it? You talk about delayed gratification, and I guarantee that somebody somewhere within 5 minutes will mention Walter Mischel. He was a psychologist from I think it was Stanford University that did the marshmallow test. With kids where kids were in the 70s, kids were sat in a room, like these are like um, 5 and 6 year old kids sat in a room and told, if you can stay in this room with a marshmallow on a plate in front of them without eating the marshmallow, after 10 minutes, we'll give you a second marshmallow. Now you can go on YouTube and you can watch some really funny footage of kids sort of wrestling with themselves and not being able to do it. And then Michel's research said that those kids that were able to resist tended to be higher performers in their adult life because they'd learned delayed gratification. And you go, that's great. But then about 10 years ago, there was research that went, but is this not contextual? Like, because if you did this with, say, Japanese children, would they have the same struggles that American kids did? And the reality is, no, they didn't. They were fine with it. But then when you change the context and you give, so Japanese children were better at being able to delay gratification when it came to a marshmallow. You give Japanese children a present and you say you've got to wait 10 minutes before you open the present, they showed a similar level of impatience. So because within the Japanese culture, you open presents right away when you get them, but you delay eating food until everybody's there. So the point the research said is all this stuff is always going to be contextual. So we can look at somebody and go, oh, they're a high performer in that domain, but it doesn't mean they're a high performer in every aspect of their life. Like one of my new favorite definitions of high performance came from an interview we did with a guy called Charles Duhigg. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning author, and he gave me what I've sort of stolen his definition of it. He said high performance is going after big ambitions, but not fucking up the rest of your life in the process. Because the point he was making is that how many people do you know have traded their health or family time or relationships or like just having a wider range of interests simply because they've been so focused on achieving their definition of success. And we look at these people and we put them on a pedestal and we admire them for being single-minded and committed and being selfless. But also there's a cost to pay for that as well. And I think we need to be careful of using these sweeping terms and then applying them, whether that's positive or negative.
Yeah. No, I agree around the piece around, and was going to be one of my questions is what's the price of high performance? I've heard that the kind of the term the gift is the curse, because the gift is the talent in X or Y if it's rugby, soccer, whatever it is, but then
Yeah,
it's the life piece that particularly when an athlete retires, and I love talking about retirement because I think particularly in sport we don't talk about it enough for something that's so
yeah,
common in terms of from a career perspective. We don't talk about it in a sporting context. So like,
yeah.
what's the price of high performance?
Again, I love the fact that you're focused on a question like this because you're right. Like, everything has a shadow side, and I think sometimes like what we praise in abundance comes at a cost if we don't give people the ability to be able to pivot or to leave those characteristics behind. Like that's probably never been better articulated to us than Johnny Wilkinson. Like when he sat down with us on the very first time we did the interview, and he explained that there was two things that drove him. That as a young adolescent boy, he developed a chronic fear of dying. So he had this terror of what would happen to him when he died. And then he convinced himself that if he lived a perfect life, whatever came after death, he would get passage into the next life. Now you go, that's a 7-year-old boy sort of trying to wrestle with some of life's big conundrums. But then at the same time, he goes on a rugby field where perfection can be measured. Can you kick 10 out of 10 kicks? Do you make 100% of your challenges? And because he's like, got this chronic fear of death that he believes he's got to be perfect, and he's found a domain where he can be perfect, that eventually takes him to play for his country at 18. But what it also leads him to do is cripple himself with anxiety and doubts and sort of train to the point where it becomes almost masochistic what he's doing. So it's a really good example that there is always a shadow side to any of this stuff that we have, and helping people to have that flexibility of thought to be able to leave stuff, to walk away from stuff is essential. And I think helping people uncouple who they are from what they do is critical, and like I'm always wary when we go, we have to do that, because you go, well, who's we? But I think it's goes back to part of the earlier answer I said about your inner circle, the people around you need to help you define yourself as more than just a sports person in whatever that is. They need to help you recognize the value you bring as a parent, as a partner, as a professional in other guises, as a sibling. Like there's so many different aspects that we play. Helping people recognize it is critical.
You've kind of, I'm going to touch retirement in a couple of different facets, but you've brought something up there that I've discussed with a couple of guests. I remember I asked Daniel Whiffen, I think it was, about, he's our gold medalist in swimming and bronze medalist last year for Ireland, one of our big
Yeah.
medalists. And I asked him, are you motivated by the fear of losing or the feeling of winning? And I'm interested in your thoughts on, and similar to Johnny's experience of using the negative motivators or the fear as a motivator, but how do we balance that it doesn't become too negative and tip the scales a bit?
Yeah, and again, there's a shadow side to both, isn't there? Like the desire to win can often result in like really unpleasant behaviors as well as a desire to avoid losing. So I think the best way is to almost have that flexibility of thought and to aim to sit somewhere in the middle, that not be that not be tied to one or those other polar opposites. Like there's that lovely story, isn't it, that Roger Federer, when he was with, I think he was a Nike athlete, and they had the advert saying, "I hate losing," and he said, "No, no, change it because that's not true. I love winning." And it's that idea of being able to recognize that pain of defeat can be useful, but actually being so fixated on the love of winning. I think I remember reading a interview years ago with Kobe Bryant who said, "I'm neutral. I just love mastering the craft. I love solving problems." And that's how he saw his role. He didn't see it as outcome focused of the winning or losing. They just happened to be a consequence of it. It was about the mastery of his craft. I love solving problems and getting better at what I do. And that to me seems like the healthiest perspective to have somewhere along this spectrum. That you can tap into it, of course. At times you can really be driven by the thrill of the victory. And sometimes, when you're facing defeat, it can give you that resolve to bite down on your gum shield and get through it. But ultimately, it's about loving the craft of what you do rather than being defined by the success or otherwise.
Mm. How do you separate then the who we are versus how we do?
Again, like I've explored this question myself, and I suppose going back to that first answer I gave you about how do we tie this into our own lives? How have I applied it? Um, I was really intrigued by this idea from again I referenced him earlier, so apologies. Peter Attia. He's a brilliant book called Outlive, where he's basically explored about these communities and societies where people live happier, longer, healthier lives. They're known as blue zones. There's sort of documentaries on it. And Peter spoke around this concept from the blue zones of ikigai, which is a Japanese phrase that translates as what gets you out of bed in the morning. And what he said is that it's not a singular question. It's a series of questions that we ask ourselves. And the questions are, what am I really good at? What do I love doing? How can I make a difference to other people by doing it? And then the final question is, and how can I get paid to do that? Now, what he argues is if you can find the sweet spot in the middle of it, if you think of it as a Venn diagram, the sweet spot in the middle, the health benefits that accrue from spending time in doing what you're good at, what you love, what makes a difference to others, and how you can be rewarded for it, has huge benefits. So I'll give you a personal example that, like, when I was reflecting on this, I was sort of thinking about it. I lost my dad a couple of years ago, and my dad, I know we spoke about it on the first podcast. I grew up in a community boxing gym in Manchester. So at my dad's funeral, it was like a huge community event. It was like 700 people turned up for it from all over the community of Manchester and boxing. And in the sort of depths of my grief, I was very conscious that because I'd interviewed Peter around this time, I was thinking, well, I love doing what I do. I don't know if I'm good at it, but it's the only thing I think I can do. And then, um, and I've been lucky enough to be able to make a living doing it. But I wasn't answering the fourth question of how do you make a positive difference to the lives of others doing it. And it was there that I recognized that I needed to do more to contribute to the community that I'm from, that helped raise me. So I spoke to my wife about it, and there was a stat that had horrified me. A friend who's a teacher had told me that in the UK, I think the stat is 31% of young kids are growing up in poverty. In Manchester, it's about 40%, which is horrific. And there's a lot of parents being confronted with the choice that nobody should be of like, do you put food in your child's stomach or do you heat the house? So fuel poverty and food poverty are two competing demands. And for a lot of parents, it's obviously you go down the food route. So we were hearing stories from a teacher friend of kids going to school without a warm winter coat. So how can you learn if you're cold, if your basic human needs aren't being addressed? And yet one of the frustrations for the teachers is that it's paperwork and looking at ways of doing it. So I decided to set up a charity called the School Coach Charity, where teachers can just send us an email and tell us the kids that are struggling without a coat, and we just buy a brand new coat for them. We send it to the school. The child doesn't know it's a charity donation, so they keep the dignity, but they just receive a coat and don't know where it's from. Now, I don't say that to be self-aggrandizing, so I'm not saying this to sort of virtue signal or pat myself on the back. I'm saying it because it's quite a selfish thing that I did it because I felt it was something missing in my life based on what the research tells us, that idea of giving back to others. When you do that, you get that helper's high, you get the benefits of it yourself. And I felt I was missing that. So that is very different from anything else that I do, but gives me just as much of a buzz that, and I think the reason I mention it is because how do we help anybody make that transition from, you don't have to be an athlete retiring, it can be anybody at different stages of life, whether it's being a parent or a partner, or you're just moving from one stage of your career to another. I think going back and regularly reflecting on those four questions, what am I good at? What do I love doing? How do I make a difference to others? And how can I get paid for doing this? Is a really simple set of questions that can have quite profound impacts in terms of the decisions that you make.
Yeah. One of my, probably my favorite, one of my favorite episodes from the High Performance podcast is fellow Irishman Paul McGinley. Someday I'll get him on, but, and again, and
Oh,
the
yeah.
avid listeners will now take a shot, as I mentioned, Paul McGinley talking to that golf coach in America, where they were talking about plan A and plan B. And Paul said, and Paul it was a great GA. I don't people realize he was a great GA player. And he said, for people that don't know, he said for him to be the best he could be in golf. And it was always interesting. He performed better in a team environment in the Ryder Cup than as an individual. But he said, I had the backup. I had the degree. I
Yeah.
had the career placement. And then I went to the Q school versus the coach who wanted golf as the only path or route or plan. And that was it. So I want to know, because it's come up a couple of times on this podcast around if you want to be one of the best and like one of the best in your field, whether it's world class or elite in terms of Ireland or European, the argument from a couple of guests has been you have to go all in for a couple of years to really reach the pinnacle. So I'd love to ask you about going all in. Do you need to do that to reach the peak?
Oh, going all in. I mean, that's a phrase as well as Paul used it. You're right. We've heard it from a few guests. Like when we asked Stephen Gerrard, what's your one golden rule? He's like two words, all in. Don't mess about. You go all in. You know, James Milner, same thing. He dedicated completely to it. You know, we've got this sort of narrative, haven't we? Of like burn your boats, no plan B. Like it's a really compelling narrative. Again, what I'd probably say, Olive, for this is it's contextual. I'd say, like, let's look at the context. So, James Milner's a really good example of it, right? He talks about Klopp at Liverpool. It's like, tell us about Klopp at Liverpool. He's like, that guy was all in for if you party at 100%. And you train at 100%. So his point was that whatever you do, give it your best, throw yourself into it. But you have to do that for everything. And like there's research on this that says like, so why do people do things? Well, some people do things because the pain of doing an alternative is too great for them. Some people do it just because it's the status quo and it's easy. And then some people do it because they've chosen to do it. So like your language often betrays you. Listen to people when they go, oh, I've got to do this. It's almost like the pain of not doing it is going to be the consequences too great. Some people go, I have to do it. So they're doing it because they recognize the thing. And some people go, I get to do this. I get to sit and talk to you this evening, Ola. So depending on which one you do, now they're all valid because they'll all get you over the line. They'll all get you to do it. But one of them burns brighter. And it's that almost that decision to go all in, to go, I get to do this. So you throw yourself into it. So it's sometimes framed as we do things through desperation, rationalization, or inspiration. All of them are useful and you'll call on them at different stages. So again, what I'd say is I think contextually it's right that once you've decided I'm going to do this, I'm going to give it absolutely everything. But I'd be wary to say that you throw your whole lot in because then I think you go back to that Charles Duhigg answer of you go after high ambitions, but you fuck up the rest of your life in the process of doing it. So I'd be reluctant to give anybody that advice to say sacrifice family, friends, interests, hobbies. You know what I mean? To achieve something. Like I remember Alistair Brownlee telling me this. He said, I've met so many people that they almost feel that their whole career is a sacrifice in order to win the gold medal. And he went, I've stood on the number one podium twice at Olympic Games with a gold medal around my neck. And he said, and let me tell you, Damien, unequivocally, it's not worth it. That gold medal is not worth the journey to get there. So what his point is so enjoy the journey. Don't do the journey in the hope that the payoff of the gold medal will somehow justify all those decisions. Because I've heard it of so many people to go, no, no, no. Like the payoff is not, the view from the top is not worth the climb. So you might as well just enjoy the climb and see the view from the top as a bonus. So I'd say it's contextually. So if you're going after it, like once you're in it, compete as hard, compete like hell. You know what I mean? But I'd be reluctant to tell anybody sacrifice everything to be able to get there.
I think it also goes back to the individual. It probably suits some people's personalities to be like, oh shit, I have no backup. I better make it work versus Paul of, great, I have a backup. I feel liberated. I can go be the best I can be. It kind of goes back to the individual effect, but I do I would very much agree with you. I'm always about have a plan B, but also, as you say, as Klopp said, and he's a great man for saying it as well, if you're all in on something, do it. And like, if you're training, be at training. If you're working, be at work. If you're partying, party. It's trying to find the balance, isn't it?
Well, there's a nice story that Milner told us that he said like when Klopp first came in and he said they played at Watford and got beat 4-1, and that night they were supposed to go to the staff Christmas party. And Milner's like, oh, we definitely won't be going after a defeat like that. And Klopp's like, no, 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 the party's not for you, it's for the staff. So you're going to go there and you're going to get on the dance floor and you're going to throw yourself around and you're going to have a great time because that doesn't change the result today. Do you know what I mean? Like we're going to the party and we've got to go all in to party and enjoy it. And then tomorrow we'll come and do a review and we'll be all in on the review of how we fix a defeat. And I think there's something really quite liberating about that. Burn your boats once you're in it, but again, I think this idea of going all in and just being singular and not leaving yourself any option. Remember, I interviewed Steve Peters, the psychiatrist, who said, he said, one of the best questions you can ask yourself is what if? Just a what if question. He said, have it in the back of your mind at all times. So when you're deciding, am I going to go after this ambition? Then just ask yourself, so what if it goes wrong? What if it doesn't work? And he said, just that willingness to take, he said, because your brain is contemplating defeat anyway. So it gets it out of your head and onto the page. So then once you've gone, right, that might go wrong. What's my plan if that goes wrong? There's your plan B. But that doesn't mean you're not all in. It just means that it just liberates you to be able to give your best in that moment.
You remind me of there's an Irish former sprinter. It's just inducted into our Athletics Hall of Fame, Derval O'Rourke. I haven't had her on yet, but she is promised to come on. But she was talking about during her career, she was a very interesting character in terms of how she managed everything off the track. And one of the things she did was she always had a plan around retirement, which is not something that I would hear regularly from people. And she kind of, and I didn't get to ask her yet. I will ask her, like, how did you have the foresight to do, because of, again, of that all in culture? But I think it was, I think there's an understanding with her anyway that she was like, it will end. So maybe she had that question. I'd love to know now. I'll let you know if I ask her the what if, because especially in sport injury, I'm always thinking of, the athlete that's on the cusp of making it or about to make it, or maybe does make it, but doesn't reach their potential because of injury or setback. Like, I'm just interested in your thoughts around planning for retirement without banking on retirement and looking at it too much, but just having the kind of, as you say, the what if in the back of your head.
Well, what we know is that your brain can't contemplate more than like again, I'll use Steve as an example, Steve Peters, where he said, give people two balls and they can juggle two. Give them three and they'll start to struggle. Give them four and pretty much nobody can do it if you've never learnt the skill of juggling. And he went, and that's like problems in your head that it will just you can't hold more than four problems in your head without it starting to create a problem. So the plan is to get the problem out of your head and onto the page. So that stops your, in his language, the chimp or the limbic system hijacking you and making short-term impulsive reactive decisions, and allows your prefrontal cortex to be able to start to plan. And once you can plan, you'll often have a more elegant response rather than an inelegant reaction. So I think that idea of going, of just asking the what if question, it's sometimes called a pre-mortem. There's another brilliant psychologist called Gary Klein refers to this as a pre-mortem that just asks the question, what can kill me? What are the things that are likely to kill my career or my ambitions? And then if you work out, say, the two or three common things in the case that you've just mentioned there, all it might be injury, it might be um, a loss of form, it might be a coach doesn't pick me for whatever reason. So if you go through these pre-mortems and go, these are the things that could go wrong. So then the next question is, so what's my plan to handle them should they happen? And what the evidence says is that if you're willing to just lean into those two questions and ask the what if question, the pre-mortem one, and then the plan question of what am I going to happen, your resilience to bounce back from those setbacks improves by about 30% because you've anticipated it. Your brain goes, I knew this could happen, but I also know I've got a plan to follow on the back of it. It's just a really simple way that anyone can adopt it within their own lives. So when I work with teams, you go, what could go wrong in today's game? And you go, the referee might give a bad decision against you. You might get an injury and your substitute might not be ready to come on. It might be that you get given a goal against you that should have been disallowed. These are all things that can happen. My question is that how are you going to handle them should they occur? And you can often see it in lots of subtle ways in those pressure moments. Those athletes that have been willing to lean into the what if question versus those that haven't. So as I said to you earlier, my background's boxing. So whenever you watch a boxer get put on the floor, you can see the ones that have engaged in the what if question versus the ones that haven't. So whether you like it or not, the referee's going to count to 8 seconds once you've been knocked down, whether you deserve to get knocked down or not. Now, if you've contemplated this, what you'll probably do is you'll sit on the floor for 2 seconds and draw breath. You'll get up on one knee at 4 seconds. At 6 seconds, you're looking at your corner for instructions. And at 8 seconds, you stood up again, composing yourself and telling the referee you can carry on. If you've not ever done that, your limbic system kicks in and you're jumping up off the canvas to prove that you weren't hurt and you're fine because your ego has now hijacked you. So it's a really simple metaphor to help people say, are you reacting or responding? And a what if question is your most effective way of being able to shift to those two modes.
I love it because we hear so many people talk about visualization and kind of preparing before an event or a match or whatever they're doing, and some people always say, "Oh, I never think of the negatives," and I'm like, "But
Yeah.
the negatives, like, it's going to happen. Well, it's probably going to happen. It most likely will happen. So, like, if you're not prepared, then what are you going to do when it does happen?" But I can understand their thoughts on, I just want to focus on the positives. I don't want to think that a negative will happen, but like a negative is going to happen, so you need to plan for it.
Well, Chris Hoy, when I interviewed him, Chris Hoy called it the Father Christmas syndrome. Now, I should just say, if there's anyone listening to this with children nearby, maybe just turn this off for what we'll say next. But his point was that when you're a child and you believe in Father Christmas, you can't imagine a world where it doesn't exist. And then when you find out the truth, you can never go back and believe what you did beforehand. So if you believe that you're unbeatable, you believe that you're supremely talented and that you can't be defeated, and you visualize that. What happens when you do? What happens when you go behind? You've almost like constructed this whole belief system for yourself that's so fragile that your ability to respond effectively becomes like a real uphill climb. And I think that's the same thing, that it's not that positive thinking is a bad thing per se, but purely positive thinking is a dangerous thing because you have to accept that it's not a linear path to success. There's going to be bumps along the road, and it's it there's that phrase, isn't it? It's not the setback, it's your comeback that's more important. Think about it. Like if you go to a restaurant and somebody spills food, you can live with that. It's how they handle the response to it afterwards. If they blame you and suggest that you were clumsy and it was your fault and that it was that, why can't you just accept that accidents happen? That's probably going to piss you off more than if they just go, listen, I'm sorry that happened. How can we fix it? How can we make it better? The comeback is always going to be more significant than the setback. And I think having that balance between the two of visualization and catastrophization are really effective methods.
That question has reminded me to actually look at my question list because I've just haven't looked at it for the past 45 minutes.
That's great. Yeah.
I,
You're very good at this, Ola. I thought this is looking really seamless. So
I'm like, it's like the duck, Damien, when you see them gliding and the legs are just underneath, they're just flying away.
you're lucky, mate. You're a swan, not a duck. Let's use that.
Love it, love it. But a friend of mine actually gave me a great question. I better give her credit, or she'll be given out to me. Apart from the obvious key behaviours of top performers, I'd be curious to hear how the top performers, in his eyes, manage or deal with conflict.
Oh, that's a good one. So who was it who said it so we can credit them?
A friend of mine, Shuan, who's actually a sports psych by trade. She lives in Birmingham.
All right. June.
Shuan.
Stewart. All right. So that's a great question, Stuart. Again, I've looked at this that Dame Laura Kenny had this great idea that she said, my greatest quality wasn't my lung capacity, wasn't my aerobic fitness, wasn't my strategic ability on a bike. She said, my best ability is learning how to disagree agreeably. And I think there's something that we can all learn from that, that she said it was a skill that she struggled with until she actually invested some time to get better at it. So she said that often the response is that you sort of blow up and you get frustrated, that you sort of give feedback to somebody from a place of frustration when something's gone wrong. And so that impairs your ability to learn because you're looking to apportion blame. So giving feedback regularly to talk about how do we get better is really important, obviously. And she said that the way that she practices it with her husband, Jason Kenny, and given I think they've got something like 9 Olympic golds in their house between them, I think it sort of validates their wisdom that they often try to find common ground before they start to give each other feedback. So they look to agree before they disagree. Do you know what I mean? That it might be, she said, it might be like um, with parents, it might be a disagreement about their children. And they start with the idea that we're both coming at this from a place of love and care, and we both want the best, but we've got two different perspectives. So once we've established that common ground, they said, we argue to learn, not to win. And there's research on this that they found online that when you go into a conversation and you're primed beforehand, what can I learn from this discussion with somebody from a different perspective? You're more likely to find that common ground rather than if you go in equipped thinking, I've got to win this argument. Your ability to see somebody else's perspective and be flexible becomes really severely impaired. So that's the first one about if you're going to give feedback, go in to learn rather than to win or to impose yourself. Another way is spoke to an entrepreneur, she's on Dragon's Den on sort of English telly called Sarah Davis. She said that she said I thought I was great at feedback until I realized I wasn't. And the metaphor she used, she said, I used to deliver my feedback, and she said it was like a waif of ham in a big slice of bread. She said that was like her definition of the shit sandwich. So she'd tell you how amazing you were, all that, and then she'd slip in somewhere in the middle. I don't like what you did there, but you're amazing and I love you and things like that. And she said she realized that she describes it as that Kim Scott book. She calls that ruinous empathy, where she made the Kim Scott distinction of radical candor. So the metaphor she uses is when I deliver feedback, I deliver a steak in a pita bread. So I'll let you know I care about you. I'm on your side and I'm invested in your success. So let's establish that first of all. Now let me tell you where you can get better. Let me tell you how to improve. And she said that distinction of being able to give feedback with sort of radical candor, that willingness to do that is key. And then the third aspect of how we do it is um, there was a study of like, a big meta-analysis of over 100 sort of papers looking at feedback, and it said that feedback often doesn't work. The most effective way is feeding forward. So rather than review what you just did wrong, let's feed forward and talk about what would you do differently next time. And that's been proven to have the best impact of changing behavior. So there's three things there that I'd answer that question about how do high performers disagree. First of all, you go into a conversation seeking to learn, not to win. Then you adopt radical candor and you deliver the feedback that's pretty robust. And then finally, this idea of you feed it forward to talk about what we're going to do differently rather than reflect on what we did badly.
When you were saying that, I actually read that book, well, majority of the book you sent me, the manuscript, and I remember reading the piece from Sarah, and I love watching her on Dragon's Edge. She's probably my favourite dragon, herself and
Yeah.
Stephen. And the other piece was Chris Voss, and I loved this line, negotiation is the art of letting the other side have your way. And I thought
Yeah.
that would, that similar with conflict. Yeah, I'll compromise so they can do what I want. And it's funny when you mentioned the sandwich, I think a friend of mine, I'll give him the credit. He gave me a great line because whenever I think of the sandwich, all I think of is Gordon Ramsay getting two slices of bread around someone's face and saying, "What are you, an idiot sandwich?" So I can never take the sandwich thing seriously since watching that. But it was similar to the feed forward piece. It was 2 stars and a wish. So 2 things you did well and 1 thing I wish you did next time. And it kind of goes into that feed forward thing of,
Yeah.
let's not look back, let's look forward. I have 2 questions in from someone else.
Go on.
Two deep questions, right? But I thought they were excellent. We talk about planning, measuring, and controlling our performance, but there's a whole side of life we don't control. Where does Damian sit on surrender, acceptance, or letting go? Does he believe in concepts like fate, spirituality, or simply acknowledging that some things are just beyond us?
Oh, wow. I mean, we could sit for another hour and chat about that, couldn't we? All of that's, um, if I had to give you a one-word answer, the answer is yes, I do. That there's certain things about however you choose to define it, spirituality, God, fate, a master plan, however you do, there is certain things where at some stage you just have to let go. What's meant for you and it won't go by you, but what's not meant for you will. And I think sometimes having that grace to just be able to walk away at the right moment uh, is huge. I feel like I'm waffling a bit here because I don't want to sort of dismiss such a big topic because I think we could talk about it an awful lot. But I do think that like this conversation about faith is really interesting. I've had lots with athletes and high performers that want to acknowledge the role of fate. And I think what they say is it often liberates them from getting too outcome focused. So you don't have to have a faith, but having something that liberates you from this desire to have to win at all costs. But I think the other thing that I've seen from athletes that do it is it also then gives them almost like a moral compass of how you're going to conduct yourself. Do you know what I'm saying? Rather than it's not win or lose, it's I'm still going to behave with grace and dignity and conduct myself with class. And so I think those two things go hand in hand to be able to do it. I'm trying to think of athletes that are people that I've spoken to that have been really explicit about faith. There's been a few, but I'd say that's the overwhelming thing of one, it allows them to stop being outcome focused, and secondly, it gives them a sense of a moral compass of how they're going to conduct themselves and behave.
The other question I thought was very interesting and leads into something that I'm very aware of in terms of, we always see the Nadals and the Federers and tennis references there, the LeBrons, Messi's, and etc.
Yeah.
etc. I'm always very conscious of the hundreds or thousands of people that didn't make it, that were almost the Nadal. This question kind of leads into it. Meritocracy suggests that if you work hard and take risks, you'll succeed. Yet we rarely acknowledge the support behind those success stories, or the many people who worked just as hard but didn't make it. So in Damian's view, how much of high performance is actually about accepting uncertainty and recognising we can't control everything?
Oh man, but again, I feel like this goes back to our like a theme, if you like, Ola, of our conversation that I think I like, and I'll speak on behalf of Jake as well when the pair of us do the podcast. We're really reluctant sometimes to engage in like survivorship bias. You know what I mean? That because you've been successful, you were somehow special, or you were ordained, or you did something that nobody else was doing. When the reality is, no, everyone was doing that. And maybe you had some genetic advantage, maybe you were lucky, maybe you had the role of a parent, or you grew up in an environment that nurtured it. There's lots of different things that I think if we don't acknowledge that role of luck and fortune, I think we're in sort of very dangerous territory there of conferring sort of godlike status on some of these people that just happen to to be talented and to be disciplined, and there's lots of good qualities, but they were also very fortunate of where they grew up, or the advantages that they were blessed with without anything to do with them. So again, I think that's a really good example of like when you listen to high performers talking, how much do they acknowledge that bit? Because I think that then tells you they recognize their limitations. So this sort of buzzword that goes around, especially the world of elite sport, of humility, oh yeah, you got to be humble. Humility isn't about thinking of yourself less. It's just or thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. So it's then acknowledging where luck played a significant part in it. And I think that's been consistent across so many high performers. There's very few of them sort of imbue themselves with this sense of greatness that other people do. They recognize that, nah, I got lucky there. That was just to my advantage. So I think it's critical that we remind ourselves of that. There's been lots of incredible people that didn't achieve the success of Nadal or Federer in that world, but that doesn't mean that they were less talented or they weren't working hard or doing it. They just maybe didn't have the advantages.
Mm. I have a lot of younger athletes that listen that are kind of trying to be elite or on the cusp of elite or entering the elite sphere. What's a question do you think that every kind of rising star, I call them one to watch, that they should ask themselves at this point of the journey, but almost never do?
I think a question that they should ask themselves is, um, if all this was stripped away, who am I? If I wasn't competing, who would I be? If I wasn't winning medals, who would love me? And I think just stripping yourself away from that is really uncomfortable. But it starts to get to that inner truth of going, no, 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 I'm I'm a really loving son. I'm a great partner. I'm a really brilliant friend. You start looking at all the different roles so that you play. Like I had this a few years ago. I was doing some work. A friend of mine had took over as the head coach of a rugby club in England, and he asked me to help him out for a bit. So I did 6 months of going back and forth. And there was a young athlete there that was getting some dogs abuse on social media, and it was horrible. I saw some of the shit he was having to put up with, and he was dealing with it hard. But you go, you're a 23-year-old lad. Like I find it hard now if somebody was writing that about me, as a 50-year-old man. For you as a 23-year-old lad, that's tough. So then the best way I could help him was I said to him, would you write down a list of the people whose opinion matters most to you? Is that what you mean? It was like, tell me the people that understand your journey, that if they said to you, oh, that's not good enough, you would know that they're doing it from a place of love because they appreciate how hard you work and what you're trying to do. And they've seen the sacrifices you've made and they know who you are as a person and know that you've not taken shortcuts. So when he came up with the list, and I reckon most people that do this, he came up with five. And in his case, at 23, it was his parents, it was his girlfriend, it was his first coach, and it was his best mate or something like that. It was a list. And I said, would any of those people call you, like drop the C bomb on you? Would any of those people say that you're a coward? Would any of those people say that you're lazy? And he was like, no. I was like, because they know you and they've earned the right that if they gave you feedback and said that wasn't good enough, you would listen to them because you know that it comes from that place of love. Anyone else hasn't earned the right to have an opinion for you to listen to. And I think to go back to the question any young athlete listening to this is like go and ask that question of the five people in your life that really matter. Who am I if I wasn't competing? If I wasn't doing really well in this domain, what would you say about me? What do I offer you? And you'll very quickly discover that that's who you are, and that's who you'll be long after the spotlight fades.
Yeah, I remember we actually discussed that the last time. I think it was about developing self awareness. It was again an exercise. Pick the five people around you, and you'll find
Yeah.
out who you are. Actually, you've prompted the question I was going to ask you. So, Damien, if the podcast was your Olympic medal, where would you be if you weren't doing the high performance podcast? And what would you work on? What would you like to do with your day?
Well, my life has been spent in the shadows. I'm happiest in the shadows. So the High Performance podcast has sort of pushed me in that Lev Vygotsky zone of proximal performance or zone of proximal opportunity. I'm definitely in my stretch zone, and on occasions I've been in my panic zone. I think my comfort zone has been in the shadows of sort of what I love doing is work. I'm the son of a coach, so working with coaches to take this idea of high performance and culture and helping them say, this is how we translate it. It's what I've spent the best part of 25 years doing all, and I love it. I love doing the writing, and I love doing the interviews. But then, so that's what I enjoy doing more than anything. I think I hesitate to say it's a talent, but what I love is wrestling with how do you take complex information and make it simple and accessible and practical. So that's what I love doing. Now, the podcast has been great because it's allowed me to be able to still do that. I've had to go out my comfort zone a few times and sort of do sort of interviews or promote a book or things like that that don't come naturally to me. But the essence of what I really enjoy doing, what fires me up, that's consistent, and I'd be doing that whether it was on the podcast or not, I think.
The shadows, being in the shadows, reminds me of another question I love asking, and kind of what I like observing in the teams. What's the role or the person in a group or a team sport that's key to success but often goes undervalued or appreciated?
Mm. The person that's in the shadows, I think, like Gareth Southgate was really good on this recently. He spoke about the two kit men with England. Now, I was lucky enough to go into the England camp a few times, and his point was the kit men are the ones that they get if they get 99 things right and they get one thing wrong, that one thing becomes a drama. But he went, they're the people that make it happen, and nobody acknowledges them or recognizes it. You only spot it when when they make a mistake. So I think look around in any culture and see the ones that are often there in the shadows that are not pushing themselves into the spotlight, not trying to be noticed, are the ones where they're your cultural architects is a term from Willie Raylo, the Norwegian psychologist. These are the ones that are the leaders without the title of being a leader. And they're invaluable of upholding standards, just being the arm around the shoulder, the comforting. And that's where, like, I'll tell you a funny story that I learned this lesson at a really young age that so I used to go and carry the spit bucket with my dad. So we'd go to the big events and I'd sort of carry the spit bucket to the corner of the ring and while we were getting ready, I'd go and get the ice and I'd go and get the bandages and the towels. So I'd love being in the shadows and running around trying to bring value on the big nights. And I remember learning a really early lesson that there was a lad who he'd won a British title and he was due to and he had like a warm-up fight against this Mexican fighter. And it was November in the north of England, right? No Mexican wants to come over to England in the north in November in the north of England because it's cold, it's wet, it's dark. And this Mexican had come over for a warm-up fight, and everything we were hearing from the gym he was training in is this guy is gonna bow out as quick as he can. He just doesn't fancy it. He'll get his payday and he'll bow out. And the lad who I was working with, he was a British champion, and he asked if he could, if his mate could carry the British title into the ring with him before the fight. And nobody thought any more of it. It's like, yeah, fine, he's your mate, let him do it. And his mate sort of on the walk to the ring, the adrenaline kicked in, and he started bouncing as if he was the one doing the fighting. And he jumps in the ring and he's holding the belt above his head. And he starts getting carried away and he goes over to this Mexican and starts doing throat cutting gestures to him and making threats. And effectively, he was writing checks that his mate had to go and cash. And I remember sort of watching outside the ring and you could see this Mexican opponent. He looked like cowed initially, as if he just wanted to get the whole thing over and done with. And then once this guy started insulting him, his pride was stung. And you could see that this resolve behind his eyes sort of developed as this idiot was sort of making throat cutting gestures and threatening him. And it ended up what was supposed to be like a easy tune-up fight ended up becoming a 10-round war between the two lads. And I remember then thinking, there's the danger of people that don't want to be in the shadows. It was somebody that he saw his moment in the spotlight and wanted to make it about him rather than recognizing this isn't your moment. Get out of the way. Just come in and do your job. And that's to me like a metaphor of um, why why the work in the shadows is always most valuable, and that's where the best stuff happens.
Yeah, I love it. I do want to ask, Damien, you speak a lot about non negotiables in the
Yeah.
podcast. Is there a risk of being too rigid in your sporting career, sticking to non negotiables?
Yes, is the short answer. Where the idea comes from is that um, I came up with this term when I was going into organizations that got caught up in the idea of values. Because my view is values are such an abstract level, they're difficult to disagree with. Integrity, honesty, passion. Well, nobody's sat in that same meeting going, I disagree. I think dishonesty is fine. And I find that being apathetic is pretty good. So there's no commitment required. All you need to do when somebody says honesty, you just go, yeah, that makes sense. So the idea of drilling down to the behaviors that go, right, actually, what does honesty look like? And that means that we'll give each other constant feedback, good or bad, whatever it is, you define it. But that's a behavior. And then what I talk about is there are certain behaviors that whenever they show up, you tend to be successful. So why not make them non-negotiable? So that's the origin of it. But I think what I would say to answer your question, Ola, is that I think you need to go back and revisit them regularly because what might serve you at one stage might not serve you in a different context or a different stage of the journey. So I think it's not a one-time hit. It's a regular reflection that's required that stops you becoming hidebound to something that might not be helpful.
Am I right in thinking reflecting and learning is part of the reason why you have a new book, MicroHabits? Because the feedback maybe from the first book or from the podcast is these big changes and it's hard to implement. Is that the aim of the book? It's to show the little things that you can do?
In essence, yeah. But I'll tell you what's where it came from. That there's two things that sort of was I was sort of percolating in my head. That we did an interview with Lee Childs, you know, the author, and before interviewing him, I'd never read a Jack Reacher book, but I thought in preparation, I picked up a Jack Reacher book and read it, and I really enjoyed it. But what I also enjoyed was the short chapters because it gave a sense of pace and energy to the book, and as a sort of adventure story, that's what it demanded. But I remember thinking, I'm really enjoying the short chapters because I don't know about you. I think as our phones have meant our attention spans have got worse, our ability to sit and read quietly without distraction. I know mine has anyway. So I was thinking, I quite like the idea of doing like short chapters. And then I was taken with that idea that we'd spoke about at the start of our chat of how you do anything is how you do everything. And I was thinking about what are the certain behaviors that if somebody told you that's how I do this, it would make perfect sense about you could almost see a pattern in their career. So like the FBI hostage negotiator, Chris Voss talking about um, like empathy and sort of he uses that great phrase. Uh, uh, he says empathy saves time. Making time to chat with somebody and understand them will save you time in a conversation. Or Andy Cole, when he was talking about his time at Manchester United, he said, I never heard the word me mentioned. It was always we. So that collective idea of you think about that Manchester United team, it was about the team, not the individuals that was key. So I was thinking about how do I capture this idea of how you do anything is how you do everything in short chapters. But I wanted to make it really accessible. So anybody could pick up the book, read it at any stage and go, I could do that. So then I set myself a challenge of every example that I looked at had to have three criteria. The idea had to be really simple to understand. It had to be really small that you could do it without it costing you a penny or without it being a big change to your life. And it needed to be quick, that you could explain what you were doing to people, and it was speedy enough that people could grasp the concept. And then the fourth one is it had to be free. it couldn't cost you a penny to do any of this stuff. And then you come back to behaviors over and over again that you keep looking at. So I ended up writing 110 chapters from our guests of just picking people that we hadn't covered in the other books and showing their stuff. And then I took it to the publisher, and the publisher was like, I can't put a book out with 110 chapters, but I can put a book out with 48 chapters. So the publisher chose what they considered to be the ones that really resonated with them. And that's what the book MicroHabits is.
What chapter didn't get picked that it resonated with you, Damien? What did the publisher get wrong is what I'm asking.
No, yeah. Well, they might include, if this book does all right, I'm hoping that they'll just go, give us those other chapters. They might not as well, but it might go dreadfully. They might just go, put it in the bin. So I don't know. But there was so many of them that I found it really difficult. In the end, I had to say to the publishers, I'm finding it really hard. You have to choose for me because I love them all. Because I was the one doing like the research. I was sort of like geeking out on the research. So what I wanted to do was take the example of, say, Andy Cole, use him. Take the example of or Matthew McConaughey. Take what he told us, and everyone goes, Matthew McConaughey, I know who he is, he's really credible. And then I wanted to go and find the scientific papers that validated what they said. So you go, this isn't just practical, this is theoretical as well. So I'll give you an example. There's like a bloke called Ben Fogle. Have you ever seen him? Like he's an
I
adventure.
don't think
He's like
so.
rode across. He's like on UK TV. He's done things like he's rode across the Atlantic and he's climbed Everest and he's done all these like all this sort of like intrepid adventures. But he's like a TV host as well. And he had this line once. He went, because I could resonate with this. I'll explain it in a minute. He goes, he went, I might be the fastest runner in the world, you know. And I was like, what? He's like, I don't know though, because when I run, I never take a watch with me. And I'm like, go on, explain then. And he was like, I love running for the sake of running, not to run for a time. I don't run for company. I don't set myself challenges. I just run for what it does for my own mental health. And he went and he explained how he had a blip, and he said, I had a blip because I was constantly, everything had to be measured, everything had to be analysed, everything had to be captured as data. And he went, and I realised that that didn't appeal to my personality, whereas just going out and running for the sheer pleasure of going for a run is what brought him real joy and happiness. So he spoke about the benefits of. So I looked at the research of forest bathing, which is it's a Japanese concept, but it's not about stripping off. It's about just being in nature and the benefits it gives you um, to calm your nervous system down is huge. So that was a chapter. It's not in the book, but there's other examples that talk about this idea of how you can take simple bits of advice like that and implement it into your own life to be able to achieve your definition of high performance. So we sort of did it in things like how do you give and receive feedback is a section with like interviews from like Gordon Ramsay, Sarah Davis. How do you find your sense of purpose? So we looked at the interview we did with Simon Sinek. How do you motivate yourself? Well, Tom Daly gives us some great advice there. So there's lots of practical sections that people can take and use in their own life, but it's validated by both a high performer telling you how they do it and then the science that shows you just quite what the benefits can be.
Damien, conscious your time. If you have to go, let me know. One thing.
That's I'm enjoying it.
Brilliant. I could be here. I won't keep you all evening, but I could be here all evening. And
I'm enjoying it all.
yeah, and I haven't even finished the whole bleeding book yet, but I will. And I'll. But one of the I've written down a good few notes from it. My favorite line, and now I didn't write who it was a person. It came from the chapter, the bedtime question worth asking.
Oh, Dame Stephanie Shirley.
There you go. A person who assumes that life consists of stepping from success to success is like a who stands to a building site and shakes his head because he cannot understand why people dig deep. And when they set out to build a cathedral. That reminds me of I heard Gabby Logan in Belfast this year at a conference.
Oh yeah.
Anyone doesn't know, she's a sports TV presenter, and why her story resonated with me because she reminded in terms of what she was saying with her career and how she was real go getting and energetic and just trying to hit down every door, and I was like, sometimes I could probably be similar. And she said her boss gave her a great line once. Her old boss said, even a tight rope walker has a dull day at work. And it reminded me in a sense of you can't just always be chasing the success. There has to be the dips where you go down and you dig below the cathedral, or you get off the tightrope and you kind of have that day to just sit. Like, that's also important, I think, in striving and trying to create habits and be consistent, where you take the time to. I heard Stephen Bartlett say it before about banking his Netflix time or his rest time, where it's building towards something for the people that struggle maybe with trying to be overproductive and trying to always strive.
Oh, no, that's me. Like I'm chronic for this, so I can identify with you. There's a chapter in it about how to rest effectively. Like it was Joe Wicks, the PE fitness guru, and he used a line that resonated with me where he said, "A flower doesn't bloom all year round." And it's like, yeah, you're right. And it's like it needs to go beneath ground. It needs to like nurture its roots and things like that. And I think this idea of taking enforced breaks is key. Like, there's a chapter in the book where, based on our interview with Eddie Howe, and Eddie Howe's like, "Well, I did 12 years as a manager at Bournemouth." And he went, "I never took time just to stop and think and reflect." So when he left Bournemouth, he made a promise to his wife he was going to try to take 12 months out. And the irony was that 9 months in, he got offered the Celtic job and turned it down because he'd promised his wife, "I'm going to take 12 months, not 9 months, 12 months." And during that time, he just asked, "Do I still want to keep doing this? And if I do, how am I going to do it better next time?" And he said, just being willing to take that time off the treadmill to stop, think, and reflect galvanized him for the second half of his career. And I think there's lots of different ways that we can sort of learn that. And part of it is almost like the language you use. Rest isn't the opposite of high performance. It's part of it. It's not stopping doing it. It's actually seen as being really effective and strategic. How we do it is critical. And yeah, I'm terrible at it, but it's something that again I'm trying to get better at. But as I get older, I'm starting to think that you can't, that flower doesn't bloom all year round. You've got to take that time to care for yourself.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that chapter, How to Rest. I clearly haven't got to that point yet of the book, and that it reminds me of a piece that Daniel Wiffen brought up. And in case Phelps is listening, it's not a shot at you, Phelps. And Damien, if you ever get him on, you can ask him. But Daniel Wiffen said,
Good.
"There's no way Phelps didn't take one day off." Remember he said, "Oh, for 8 years I trained every day." Even actually,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
someone made a great point actually from an actual logistics point of view with traveling. There had to be one 24-hour window where he
Of
didn't get to
course.
train, but it's like it's part of the process, isn't it? The rest, and even I think the reflection, like how important reflection is and building habits is.
Yeah, yeah. I'll tell you a really good tip that it's a handy one. I've not used it, but I've shared it with people that have used it. Was we interviewed this reality TV star called Vicky Patterson, and she'd been through the mill, right? And she said that like she's in the world of like social media and being an influencer and a TV star. So you can imagine there's an awful lot of pressure on that you've always got to be relevant and you've got to be seen in all the right places. And she said she was burning herself out, and somebody said, "Why don't you number your days?" So a number one day is where you're full on for the whole day. You but one place to the next. Number 2 days a little bit more. It's full on, but it's not as intense. Number 3 day is where it's visibly down a gear, and then a number 4 day is you do nothing other than just indulge yourself. And she was like, just numbering days. One on the number one day that's really intense. You know you're going to have a rest sooner rather than later, so it gives you that extra energy. But it's almost like filling your batteries up. But because I'm only 2 days away from giving myself an indulge number four day. And I don't know, I found it quite a helpful way of framing it for people that might be very goal focused to go. Well, you need a mix of all three of those days, all four of those days throughout a week. So thinking about when you're taking them allows you to be strategic.
I love that. I'm 100% robbing that one. Um, Keeping accountable for those that struggle, particularly at the early stages of trying to create a new habit, and even someone. There's a good question I heard recently. It was around: do you fit your habits into your lifestyle, or do you change your lifestyle to fit your habits? And my initial response, and I said to him as well, was, I don't see how you'll change your whole day to fit in your habits from day dot. That's nearly like changing everything in the first week. If you can do it, geez, will you let me know how you did it? I've still to learn. But
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
sustainable and to build on it, and being accountable not only to yourself, or maybe having someone. I'm someone that I need someone to text me and be like, "Did you do that?" Or, I'm getting a bit better now at
Yeah.
it, trying to keep myself accountable. But just your insights on that, trying to be accountable.
Well, being a cat, again, there's a chapter in the book, where we talk about Adam Peaty, the swimmer, and he talks about he had a bit of a breakdown when he was going to Paris in 2024, about 18 months beforehand. He just became overwhelmed, and he was like, "I'm not sure I want to do this." And he's got a brilliant coach called Mel Marshall, who said to him, "This is the price that you would have to pay to go. The only question you ask is, am I willing to pay it?" And they sort of outlined it. This is the sacrifices you'll make. These are the demands. Is this something that you want to do? And it took him a while until he decided, yeah, I'm willing to pay the price. So they came up with what they called, it's called in psychology, an Odysseus contract. An Odysseus contract is that after the Greek myth, when he's on a boat and he knows he's going to go through the sirens that are going to tempt his boat to the rocks, but he won't say the sirens. He knows that his human nature is weak, so he ties himself to the mast, right? And then and his crew aren't allowed to release him. So he can listen to it, but he still manages to hear the music, but not crash and burn. So the research on this says that there's almost three elements to an Odysseus contract. The first one is you need to have a target that you're going for. The second one is you need to have a referee, someone that holds you to account. And the third one is you then need to incentivize yourself. And there has to be an incentive and a consequence. So the incentive, if you do it, this is the reward you'll get. The consequence, if you don't do it, is this. And what they found is that, so most people set goals and say the stats are in the book and the paper, but say it's like 50% of people achieve it. That goes up to 70% if you've got a referee, and it goes up to 85% if you've got a consequence with it. So you need all three elements to it to enable you to go out there and be accountable and perform. So that's what Petey said that he did in his world, that he had somebody that he had the goal, they want to go to Paris, want to win a gold. He had a referee, somebody that was holding him to account, but he also had incentives to help him along the way. Any of us could do that, whatever our targets or goals are.
Yeah, Adam really stuck out to me with his interview in 2021. It was just before Tokyo when he said what he was going to do. I love when a guest says, I'm going to win that, and then they do it. It just, they kind of not just speak it into existence, but they have the backup. But Mel Marsh, me, was up there with Paul McGinley. As if I was to pick top three, the two of them would be in it. She's incredible.
Ah, she is, yeah. But interestingly though, so Adam was proper in that gladiator mindset first time I did him. I'm going to go to um, Tokyo. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to do it. And he did it. So I'm watching it on the telly going, wow, that's amazing. 18 months after that, he crashes and burns because he said I wasn't leaving that room for doubt, for ambiguity, for uncertainty, to be able to express my emotions. I was almost like thinking that being a robot, being a warrior, a gladiator was the way to do it. But going back to that earlier quote, a flower doesn't bloom all year round. That's not sustainable.
Totally. What's the hardest truth, Damien, you've had to tell a high performer that's maybe unpopular or not always nice to hear, and how did they react? You don't have to name anyone in it, but I'm just interested to hear.
Uh, yeah, I think my job is often doing nothing and getting paid for it a lot of the time. And I don't mean that nasty because I don't mean that to be flippant either. I think often you're seeing high performers do really brilliant things, and to interfere with that would be foolish. Your ego would be getting in the way. But then occasionally you're paid to stand in the way and deliver a hard truth that says, don't do that, and this is why. And so being willing to have that conversation is key. I think I'll give you a really simple example, right? So I won't betray the confidence. I remember being in a coaching box once with a coach I was working with, and the game was going on, and I'll keep it ambiguous, so I won't even say the sport. And they turned to the coaches in the box with him, and he went, "What do you think we do here?" And both of his assistants went, "There's 20 minutes left." And I remember stood there thinking, I could have told you that. There's a clock on the wall that gave you that information. So what they've offered is relatively useless, or it's certainly not of significant value. So what's going on? Because I knew both of these coaches were intelligent, smart people. So it told me that the culture that had been created and then curated by the head coach didn't allow them to express themselves. There was no psychological safety there. So the head coach that was frustrated by the response he got, that was my job to go. That's on you. You're responsible for that. You haven't you haven't given them permission to speak with freedom when it doesn't count. So when it does, the odds of them actually delivering something of value depletes massively. So that doesn't sound, I'm conscious as I'm recounting it, it doesn't sound particularly emotive or difficult. But the easy thing there is for a coach to go, it's easy to fall in line and just go, yeah, I know what they gave you was rubbish, rather than forcing them to be reflective to go, but this is a reflection of you. So I don't know if that's the hardest one, but it's an example where it's not always easy to have that conversation. But if you don't, the consequences of not doing it will be pretty difficult for the coach. It'll come back and bite him at some
I
stage.
love that. One of the things I learned actually from a podcast guest I had on very early on was the value of going to observe and be a fly on the wall. And I've taken that nearly to the extreme of just visiting sports teams and just watching from afar. And it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I'd love to know, and I'm glad I got to do it kind of from so early on in like my career, I suppose. Damien, if you could go back and redo any of your journey from your academic or professional side, what would you do differently?
Um, that's a really good question. I think I'd probably be kinder to myself. I think I failed to recognize my value for a long time. So, you know what? There's always somebody that'll come and do the job cheaper than you. There's always somebody that'll come in and offer their services for nothing. There's always somebody that will come and make these outlandish promises of what they can achieve and how you deliver. And I get it. It's compelling, it's attractive, and it's easy. And I think for a long time, I would sort of allow myself to get dragged into a shit fight because you want to be around it. And I think when I realized just having the courage to go, if you don't want to pay, that's fine, but I'm worth more than nothing. Like even like I get it very early on in your career when you're trying to make your way in and it's a competitive industry. But there's a certain stage where you're like, no, no, sorry, there's a value to this. And if you can't recognize it, why should I expect anybody else to do that? So I think I'd have been kinder to myself and just back myself a bit earlier to walk away. I remember I walked away from a relationship with a coach that told me to fuck off once. And our relationship had been built on real trust, and I gave them some feedback that was done from a place of I've got your back here, and I feel you need to know this. And they told me to fuck off, and that was the moment when I realised that I was walked away. And when I gave them the feedback, I said our relationship has to finish now, and they were like, "Why?" And I was like, "Well, I can't allow you to speak to me like that more than once because." I get it, it's a mistake, but to do it a second time would legitimize that. Why would I give you feedback if I know that that's going to be the reaction? So that was the time when I learnt it, but I wish I'd learned that a little bit earlier.
The podcast itself, it's probably you're probably known as one of the high performance guys now, in terms of the branding of it. It's obviously evolved. But what's one thing or belief that has changed since we last spoke 4 years ago that you learned from the podcast?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, it has grown. I mean, when they tell me the numbers that the podcast does, I, it means nothing to me. And I don't mean that in a flippant way, but without context, how can it? Do you know what I mean? If somebody comes in, like the figure I often get here is like, it's done 300 million downloads. And I go, is that good or bad? And they go, what do you think? And I go, well, you know, when you drive on a road sometimes and they go, six people have died on this road in 18 months. And you go, well, is that a good or a bad thing? Like, did six people die in one accident? Is it a rat run? Was it a snowy day? Like, without understanding the context, those numbers are just numbers. So I think the thing that I'm proudest of with the podcast is I love the fact that when I hear people saying, I've used this idea from the podcast, I've used this to help me, that is far more significant than people boasting about numbers of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So, so I get a real buzz out of people going, I found this really useful, or this is how I've adopted it with my team. Like you'd be surprised that I get feedback from people in like the highest echelons of sport that will tell me they've listened to an episode or they've used it. And that feels really gratifying because you go, they're people that can sniff out bullshit. They're people that their job is to be skeptical and yet they're listening to it and going, no, no, there's value in this. So I get a real buzz out of that. And I suppose that in turn, Nola, answers the question of how has it changed? So when we first started it, it was focused on for the podcast to survive, we needed to get numbers. Do you know what I mean? And in those early years, you know how hard it is when you're doing the interviews and you're doing the prep and you're not making any money from it and it's taking up an awful lot of your personal time and things like that. That was for the first 3 years. What it was like for Jake and I were traveling all over, calling in contacts and in things like that. Um, but I think how I've changed is to appreciate the people that appreciate it and not to worry about the people that don't. That I had a guy recently, like, so I don't do social media. The podcast guys do it for me. And just recently, they asked me to put something out about the book, and so I put it out, and somebody put a comment on underneath it that was less than kind, right? And it was all like, this is a rip-off of, I'll tell you what they said. They went, this is a rip-off of James Clear's Atomic Habits. And I'm like, you've not read the book, so you can't make a comment like that without reading the book. And secondly, well, you've read it, right? Is it a rip-off of James Clear's
no,
Atomic Habits?
no, it's different.
Right, exactly. So I read it and was like, but that's not true. But you've said it with such certainty that you think your opinion is valid. Now, previously, I'd have got annoyed about that to think, like, how dare you do that? Because that's not fair and you've not. Now it's like, mate, honestly, you've not earned the right to make a comment like that. So I'm not going to invest any time in getting annoyed about it, if that makes
Yeah, no, it
sense.
does. And just to give you the reference when you were saying, I don't know if 300 million downloads is enough. That's 300 more million downloads than I have. So I think you're doing pretty well, David.
Ah, no, no. Honestly, I don't like. Please don't ever do that because you're doing an amazing job, right? And you're very skilled at it. And so I really do, I feel really uncomfortable when people then it's not a competition. That the world is about lifting each other up, not trying to trample over each other. So your podcast, like the Sideline Live, is brilliant, and the value I know. I've seen the WhatsApp groups. I know the value that people get out of you and your work. That's and but that's the point I'm saying. The numbers are irrelevant. It's the value you offer to people's lives, and you do that. So let's avoid talk about numbers and let's talk about impact.
Good point. Thank you for the kind words. I do want to ask, or I do want to actually say, I interesting that you said the first couple of years you were kind of scrambling. To be honest with you, Damien, I preferred those interviews to the ones now. The ones where you
Go
were
on.
moving around, you were trying to find. I could tell it was very much, and like you had the contacts, so like you're going to use them. Similar with I got your contact and I used yours.
Yeah.
I it's a little bit different now, and naturally it has to but everything has to change, and this my own podcast has changed, and it will change even more. But it's funny that you say that, because that was nearly the maybe I recognize a bit of the beauty in the struggle, for lack of a better term, of trying to go around. And why I loved watching all the video ones in particular, because he'd be setting up, in else's office or in a hotel here.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not the set, it's just
Yeah.
it's a bit different, and it was kind of trying to find. And you were like, a little bit was, well, who should we get on? And they were like, yeah, I probably connect you with someone. That was the kind of stuff that resonated with me. And if I could give you three guests to hopefully get on,
Go on.
because my thing as well, right? And I think I actually said it in an episode in this podcast, and I think you referenced it before when we talked before. High performance, to me, like, I don't think you can have high performance without speaking to a neurosurgeon or an anaesthetist, because that to me
Yeah.
is, we talk about high performance, world class. They're like, I think that's the two of them brought together, because that's,
Well, can
go
I
for it.
jump in there? We've had Rahul Jandial, the world's leading brain
Okay, I haven't
surgeon.
listened to that one. So yeah.
He's worth listening to. But no, I agree with you. I think those guys. So go on. You were going to make a suggestion though, but
Anaesthetist, neurosurgeon, Roy Keane.
oh, I'll tell you a story. I've got his address right, and when we first in those early years, the sort of hard scrabble where we were trying to get guests, I I've handwritten him three letters and posted them to his home address, and everyone's been ignored. But this was before he started doing podcasts himself. But I was like, how do we get Keen on? And I just thought, like, go and ask him in the politest way possible.
Yeah,
But I think his letterbox must be a shredder. You know what I mean? So it
probably,
goes,
probably.
yeah. So I'm not sure he's ever received. I'd like to think he's never received my three handwritten letters.
Yeah. I think I had to say Roy Keane, because I think it's the most, for my question in the Sideline 7, which you've answered, the dream dinner guest. He's definitely up there as a number one. People I love would be like Brian O'Driscoll
Oh yeah,
is one, like, what a legend. Ronan O'Gara. That, some of the Irish
yeah,
legends.
yeah,
And the other thing I asked you years ago, Damien, was, if your life was a book, what chapter would this be called? And the question, or the answer you gave me at the time, was waking up and smelling the coffee. And you said you then realized how you were previously chasing the wrong things and sacrificing the wrong relationships.
yeah.
So I'd love to know what the chapter is now.
Um, Stumbling towards happiness. So it's trying to like the stumble rather than the run. That gives you the idea of the fallibility, but also just the idea of sort of not rushing to get there, but just sort of trying to find ways and making mistakes and wrong turns, but ultimately just trying to find the things that make me happy and content.
I love it. Another guest you could probably get on. They're all coming out now. All the suggestions is
Go on.
Dr. Michael Gervais. I don't know if you've listened to Finding Mastery.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
He's great. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. The psychologist.
yeah. One of his questions is, at the end of the day, it all comes down to. I need to finish the sentence.
At the end of the day, it all comes down to the people that you love and the people that love you.
Amazing. Last question from me, Damien. I've taken up too much of your evening at this point. What's
It's been an absolute pleasure. Go on.
what's next?
I think this goes back. So these questions sort of build on each other, all that, which you can see what you've done, and there's again your talent as an interviewer coming out. I think this idea of constantly setting targets and goals and what's next is been to my detriment. So I think it's just there's a great line of like be where your feet are. So I'm trying to just be where my feet are, and sort of find the things that make me curious, spend time with the people that I can empathize with, that I love, and do the things that I enjoy. And so without setting a target of going, I want to do another book. I want to do this. Like this book, MicroHabits, came out of my own curiosity of trying to find things that are quite complex and make them simple, but really be valuable to people that are kind enough to read or listen to it. And so I'm not focused on trying to sell the book or trying to promote it. I just want to share the insights from it. But so what's next for me is just to try and keep reminding myself to be where my feet are and not looking for the next thing and the next thing.
Amazing. Well, Damian, it was a pleasure. I look forward to watching the next steps and to finishing that book as well, and maybe getting over to a live show at some point. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Oh, Ola, thank you. And let me just say again for anyone that has got this far in the interview with us, the hard work that you put into this podcast is exceptional, and it's the stuff in the shadows that you can listen to it and not fully appreciate it. But I also know sitting in your seat, like the hard work and the diligence that goes into preparing for a guest, and then the skill of being able to ask the right question at the right time in the right way. That you're exceptional at it, and it's been a pleasure to sit and experience that from a guest perspective. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Damian. Thank you. And I'll take that as we'll do a round 3 in another 4 years.
If you will have me, I would love to. Yeah.
Absolutely. Damian, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Arla.